Your literary happy hour.
Fun show.
I want you to find the next author you're going to love.
On a more serious note.
Welcome to the Whiskey Bar.
Bring my hands up like, you know what
Whatever happens, probably will.
So what are we drinking? Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Writers Drinking Whiskey, as their little promo there with the smoking calls it, your literary happy hour. Very excited, thrilled, and honored today to have on Callie White with me. Callie, welcome to the Whiskey Bar.
So much. This is the first time I've done a writer's podcast where drinking was encouraged. So I'm all for this.
Right. I mean, really, shouldn't it always be encouraged? Like, I feel like there's such a connection with writers and drinking. Like, this should be the norm.
I feel like I need to probably do it throughout everything in my life. That might be what I'm doing wrong, but that's maybe another past discussion.
Right. Well, as someone that does actually include it with everything out, it doesn't always work out so well. There's probably some happy medium between us. For the audience here, so Callie got the three novels, The Monsters We Make, The Good Divide, and The Space Between, along with, short story writing and essays, aplenty. You won the American Book Award. I think the Eric Hoffer Book Awards on here. There's a very long list of impressive, credits, and kudos to you for those. My favorite, actually, from reading your bio was that you used to teach gymnastics. So I have a laundry list of gymnastics questions, actually, I want to get to. But so that's my brief introduction. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, that sounds good. I'm in the Iowa area. For anyone interested, I'm a lifelong Iowan, former farm kid. I live outside Des Moines with my husband, and I have 3 kids. 2 of them are grown, young adult and college age, and I have 1 left at home who will graduate next year.
Oh, awesome. So we're in similar boats there because we have 4 kids, 2 of which are grown. And actually now we have 2 grandkids. So we've jumped ahead maybe with the grandkid part, but we still have 2 homes still.
I think I'm kind of over raising my own kids. I'm exhausted. This last one, our poor daughter, we have a little bit of senioritis for her, like, to be done.
Mm-hmm. I believe it. That's funny. We feel that way too. Actually, even the older kids have noticed with the youngest kid. They're like, "Man, you don't know what it was like." And it's like, he doesn't. He's like, we're exhausted now and just ready to go on vacation.
It runs us over because we're too tired. We've given up. Do what you want. Throw a party. Right. Just clean up.
Yeah, exactly. It's all going to be fine. Just leave me be. Give me some peace here, and you do you. I'll do me. We're all good here. Yeah. Awesome. So
that's sort of the mental space for me. I don't really for those who are getting concerned, I don't really let my teenage daughter throw parties. She would probably love it if I did, but.
Right. Well, she would never clean up. So if it was throw a party, just clean up, it still wouldn't happen. So I always like to ask, so I'm actually glad you mentioned that you're in Iowa. And I think it mentioned you're just outside of Des Moines.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
We're maybe 20 minutes outside of kind of east of Des Moines, northeast of Des Moines. Yeah. We're out in the country. Our town it's not a suburb of Des Moines, but it's very close. It's a big growing community, and we live out in the country. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So if I'm ever so you're in the country, so would be a fun, but you can also answer for Des Moines as well. But we're ever visiting, where's the one place I need to get a drink, and what's the one thing to do?
Ooh, so my favorite places to go get a drink, and good food is Centro. It's a great steakhouse downtown. There's also a really good, the best steakhouse is 801. It's super expensive. Budget. Centro has great steak, great drink. And something to do. We have a nice river walk downtown, along the Des Moines River with all these beautiful bridges, and it's very pedestrian friendly. They have a big skate park down there. That's kind of a nice place just to walk through.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds awesome. And I'll find it and I'll put a link on it too. But now it's like and I know you didn't even say that much, but now I just really want to go there and have a steak and like an old fashioned. Like you just said that. And I was like, man, I need to go walk that river and just go there and get a steak and old fashioned.
But we know beef. Like we do beef and pork like nobody's business.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, in California, you'll find seafood aplenty and sushi and things, but you can find good steakhouses and too, I'm sure. But
and I ate seafood almost everywhere I went. Yeah, we just don't drink seafood here.
Sure. So, I think we should transition then to my very, very favorite part of the show. What are we drinking?
Okay, so I'm not drinking whiskey. I don't mind whiskey, and I do drink whiskey sometimes, but the weather's gotten really nice, and my husband and I are big bicyclists, and the drink around here is Moscow Mules. So
Okay.
That I've had for many, many years. And it's my favorite version of a mule. I like to do peach vodka, and it's this brand. So I don't know who this brand is, but you're welcome. My favorite brand. I do one shot and a half of it, and with some ice, put a little ginger beer in it, throw in a lime, and it's my favorite summer drink. I drink it all summer.
Yeah, awesome. My wife got really obsessed with Moscow Mules for a while, and there's this place, I think it's called Rachel's, that's up in like Seattle, and her brother sent it. Her brother, or I forget, or her brother-in-law got these, and there's like different flavors of ginger beer. And so it used to be she would order this like ahead of like our parties and things. So like she'd have to order like 2 or 3 weeks. It's a fairly small, business, and she'd get all these bottles, and we'd make our Moscow Mules, or I'll make like an Irish mule and put some whiskey, Irish whiskey in. But yeah,
they are my favorite thing to drink in the summer, and I like mine. I like drinks a little bit sweeter maybe than some people, which is why I do the peach vodka, because it's a little bit sweeter. But if you put just regular vodka in, you get it a little more tangy. But if you're old like me, that between that and the ginger beer, it gives me heartburn. So I go for a little because I'm old. To think about things like that.
Right, sure. So, and I'm going to make a fairly simple Manhattan here for everyone, but I'm going to put a little bit of a smoky twist on it. So, for anyone, and Manhattan is an old recipe. People watching the show will realize I'm just an old soul. I mean, these recipes are much older than me, but I'm just like, I'm going to have an old fashioned. And then when these crazy kids get, crazy and they change the old fashioned recipe, I'm like, no, it's an old fashioned. Like you want to make a twist, you call it something different. Like an old fashioned is supposed to be like colloquially, or that's not the right word, but traditionally it's the first cocktail, right? So you don't change the first cocktail, you make new ones, right, and you give them different names. That's my spiel for today. But the Manhattan, it's usually 2 ounces of usually rye. Some you can use a bourbon, but I actually did some sleuthing on the interweb and was going off. I think Whiskey Tribe is a YouTube channel, and they had suggested Rittenhouse rye for the old fashioned. So I usually do 2 ounces of that. Some of this is off camera, but I will show the work at the end. I also sleuthed the internet for some. Did I not open this for myself? Yes, I did. Got another bottle. And then about an ounce of sweet vermouth. And the one I'm using here is the Gallo. So about an ounce of that. And then just a couple spritz of bitters. I'm going to use these, Angostura. I always forget how to pronounce that correctly. And the one thing I like to do, though, to spruce this up a little, and you have to be really careful if you do it this way, is I like it to be a little smokier, so I'll add a little scotch. If you add too much scotch, it will the ingredients don't combine. It feels like you're tasting like 6 different drinks. And my brother-in-law and a friend of mine, we were over here playing with this recipe like 2 weekends ago because I wanted to use it for the show. And we had 3 of these drinks that was like 6 drinks in one. And we're like, none of this like blends together. So finally figured out the way to do this. And I'm going to use a Lagavulin. And people that are very into Lagavulin are going to kill me for using the 16 on this, but I'm only going to use a splash. So that splash will actually be more than enough to make it a little smoky, give it that little bit of a peatiness on top of the normal Manhattan taste, which is what I like about it. So, and then all you do, I mean, you just give that a little swirl. You don't shake a Manhattan, just give it a little swirl. Here, I can even swirl. Swirling on camera. This is what adults do, kids. And you just strain that in. Usually you can get a Manhattan up, or you can get it here. I'll see if I can get it on camera, or you can get it on the rocks. As we mentioned, it's summer, and it's pretty warm here, so I'm going to do it on the rocks, just because I want the added ice. And here is the final product.
Oh, that's
you
good.
Can, you can put a cherry in there. There's I really like. There's the Woodford bourbon cherries, they call them. I think they're the Luxardo. I don't know if I'm saying the cherry's name right, but cherry that they age and they're sweet. I'll add those sometimes, but I'm just going to take this one like this, and you can really smell the smokiness. So cheers.
Cheers.
Awesome. So let's get into it here. So I thought about this as I was, because I prepare for hours for every one of these shows. This was a lot of heavy thinking on my part. But I really like to start everyone. And then the first season, I pretty much asked everyone to start like, what's a pet peeve? What's something, and it was a fun way to get started. I thought about it. I was like, that'd be really funny if people were doing that on dates. Like, you go on a date, first thing you meet someone, you're just like, what pisses you off?
I think we need to just lay it all out. This should be early information we share.
Right, exactly. So, So what is a pet peeve, or maybe what's the last thing? It doesn't have to be, there's a fly buzzing me now. Doesn't need to be anything overly dramatic or personal, but maybe what's the last thing that made you lose your cool that really shouldn't have?
Well, that would be just 2 days ago, I had a complete meltdown. So my new point and source of rage is how overly everything has gone tech and app and self, like my middle son, he's at Iowa State University. He needs to take one class at the community college here through the summer. And the process of getting him applied, and then nothing was happening. He was waiting for his student ID and his email and password. All of this was online. We were just completely stuck. It's all 100% self, like everything happens online. And trying to work with tech as to why he hadn't gotten a student ID and couldn't register yet. And it was like all this 2-factor authentication, and it would send it to his cell phone, which then he had to enter in. And it's like that. If you want to just check your bank statement, you have
right.
your username, then your password, then it's your PIN, and then another 2-factor authentication that usually goes to my husband's phone for some reason. So then I'm screaming at him downstairs to please text it to me. So it's out of control.
I agree.
Passwords and usernames and pins that we, for all the various things we do in life, and 3 kids, and it's so out of control. And my husband just called his mother today because he wants to just give her an old iPad that she could play some games on, but she has to have an Apple ID. And his poor mother, when he said, "Mom, what's your Apple ID?" And she was like, "What the heck?" I don't know what an Apple. What's an Apple ID? Why would I know what an app? What it even is, let alone if I have one. So I feel like it's like leaving, whole populations behind, and the rest of us. I feel like what should be making our lives easier and more convenient, I find just adds more stress dealing with.
I agree with you. I heard there's a movement of people going back to dumb phones, and like they're not just the look of like a flip phone, really to where it is just a phone, not this computer like tablet in your pocket. It's just has a phone. Maybe you can text, and that's the end of it.
It causes me so much stress. I teach online, so my whole life is pretty much lived online. But like sometimes my first students, they had all kinds of registration problems this year because it's a whole new software and platform. They do all this registration online themselves. They almost never deal with a human anymore. And when it works, it's great. But if you hit one tiny glitch, you will tumble into this endless abyss of technology, of just.
Right. Yep. And then every place has a different password and different password requirements. And so you're always just changing passwords and recovering and two-factor. And now there's like an authenticator app. So sometimes it asks me, I have to go onto a different app on my phone. And it's funny, we were talking about this. There was a study that came out is that when you walk through doorways, you tend to forget, because I forget and I can try to include it on the notes if anyone wants to look at it. But if I can paraphrase it well enough, it's basically like that door is as a stop to what you're doing and an entry to a new thing. And so we tend to, like, when you walk into another room and forget, it's not that we have bad memories. It's actually, that's a very natural thing. And I feel like that with the phone is that every app, for one, everyone's trying to get your attention. So nothing does. You just forget. Every second I pick up my phone, I forget why I picked it up. And I always feel like anytime you click on one, you just forget, because it's like you're going through doors all the time, door. And I have Post-its just everywhere now because it's actually easier for me to manage.
I live and die by Post-its. And the modes of communication, like I can't, especially for like writers, there's such pressure to have an online social media presence. Well, most of us, we have an author website with, a contact for us through that. If we work, we have a separate work email. We have a separate maybe family or personal email. Then if you have Facebook, there's Messenger, there's, DMs in Instagram and Twitter. And and that's on top of texting, which if you have children, your children are texting you all day long saying, when you go to the grocery store, will you get me a new bag of chips?
Right.
I can't, I'm so overwhelmed by the avalanche of communication I get on a daily basis.
Sure. I believe it. And the one that actually, and my wife knows this, the one that will literally, I will just like, I'm actually very poised and calm most of the time. But immediately if I call and I get that voice operator, and if it gives me prompts, I can push buttons, I'm a little better. But when I have to talk and then it doesn't understand me, I just start yelling operator. And then it keeps fighting with you because it doesn't want you to talk to a human. And I'm just like, operator. Waking the house up, like losing.
It's like you're psychotic, just screaming into it.
Right. I don't want to talk to the robot. Just give me a person, please. Please.
I'm going to be that old person someday. I feel it happening. I'm heading that way. Like 20 years from now, I will be that old person. Like, I don't want to learn how to use whatever the new thing.
Right.
I can barely deal with what we have to deal with now. It's so overwhelming.
Right. Sure. Oh, I feel that way now. Because I mean, like you mentioned, it's just, our family, there's like, we have a family text that works okay. But then it's, now like my wife's family only likes to talk on like WhatsApp. So there's like a family communication with WhatsApp. And then there's Facebook Messenger. And then there's this. And there's certain ones they know I don't reply to. I'm like, nope, too much modes of communication. text me, or just better yet, just talk to me when you see me. Like, I think that's good enough.
I lose track of things, and then I can't remember where it was, and I can't find it. And sometimes I miss to find the messages, and then then I feel bad, and it's just this endless circle.
Right. What's a guilty pleasure?
Oh, okay. So, a new guilty pleasure that I have developed, well, a long time guilty pleasure I've had is I'm a huge true crime junkie. So, I love the shows, like anything documentary, anything episodic. So Dateline, 48 Hours, Forensic Files. If there's anything on 2020, I love all of those. And if there's like a Netflix crime documentary that's like multiple series, I will binge the whole thing in one evening. So that is my guilty pleasure. But my other new guilty pleasure is I have found myself rewatching a lot of the old 80s and 90s TV shows and series that I know have not aged very well. Like, they're not very, like, the representation sometimes in it isn't very good, or, sometimes they're problematic scenes, but I can't help it. They're, old from my youth. And
Sure.
Indulge those too.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's funny that you mentioned that, because I started doing that too. I actually have a list because I wanted to start showing the kids a lot of them. So my son, so my wife is Chinese, right? So our son's half Chinese, and so we watched the Goonies, and then
Good movie.
Yeah, dude, Goonies is great. We were watching Data, and my son's 12. I think that's the character's name, right? Data with the yeah. And he's like, oh, is that kind of racist, Dad? And I'm like, yeah, kind of, but I don't, to its defense, I don't think it's I think it's more racist out of like ignorance to like not out of meanness, right? Like, Data was an important Goonie just as much as everyone else. Like, it just was like, flying in the sky, didn't realize like, oh, like maybe every Asian person doesn't have this like highly effective like accent.
Correct. The other ones that I watched so much when I was growing up was all the old John Hughes movies, like 60s favorites growing up. And now there are aspects of it that are so cringeworthy and like, but yet at its heart, I still love the story itself.
It's like when you have like an older relative, and they'll still like use terms like, no one really says that anymore. But you realize like they have a good heart. It's just they haven't kept up. Like, they know what they're doing is maybe offensive to people. That's what some of the movie is like. Man, the stories are so great. There's so much great with them. But yeah, sometimes you get those moments where you're like, Grandma, you shouldn't really say that anymore.
Right. I do. It is funny though that how differently I view a lot of those movies and TV shows now, that we've come through so much of what we've come through especially in the last 5 years. I feel like so much of the population has had their eyes opened and has a much more enlightened, or I don't know if that's the right word, but just have their eyes open. And so then you go back to look at some of those favorites and think, oh, shit, that's okay. Yeah. That's today than it did. Then I remember it when I was 14.
Sure. It's funny you mentioned the true crime and stuff, because my wife was really into those for a while. And I swear every one she watched involved like a woman murdering her husband, at least like 30%. So or probably like 70%. She'd be watching these like before bed. So she turns it on. I would go to bed because at that point I was waking up really early and I was commuting. And so she would watch, and I'd watch maybe one with her, and then I'd like lay down and I look over and it's like, oh, and then, Sheila Hincy killed her husband and this. And then I look over and she's just like smiling, watching TV. And I'm like, I should be uncomfortable right now, but we're all going to die at some point. I'm going to bed.
She was forever called Snapped. That maybe was what she was watching. And it was all about women who snapped and killed somebody.
Maybe that was the one. What that reminded me of actually is we actually had a friend who was the subject of a 60 Minutes episode. And that's one that kind of haunts me. You go through life, right? And then you have these friends, and especially when you get older, you get it, right? Like, we can be very good friends in our 20s. When we start having kids, everyone moves on, and you still care about that person, but you're not in touch day to day because that's just how life happens. And so we had a friend that was on, I forget the name of the episode, but it was basically about people that go to rehab and meet people and they'd get into relationships. And unfortunately, our friend kind of recovers from alcoholism, drugs. They get engaged, and that night they decided we'll have champagne to celebrate. And he ends up beating her to death. And the whole episode was about that. Like, you go to rehab to kind of recover, and then you get people with similar problems kind of get together. And then if you don't manage, right, it can come back to disastrous results. So it was really tragic. So it's like, I think that might be why we stopped watching those, because like it got very personal and like kind of hurt. We weren't friends. We went to all the memorials and all of that. I shouldn't say we weren't friends. We just weren't communicating regularly anymore at that point. So that still haunts me, right? Some of those things, like, you always feel like, oh, why didn't we keep a little better contact with people, like just try to touch base. Not that you can stop everything. I don't think there's anything we would have done. But it kind of haunts me to this day. And it doesn't have to be so serious, but is there anything that haunts you?
Yes. And it is very similar to your answer. So I have been writing kind of in the true crime genre. My last book was definitely true crime, and it was loosely based on a real case here in Des Moines. And then my next book is also loosely based on another true crime case. And while I was working on this new one, it was right before the Monsters Remake was getting ready to launch. My neighbors across the street, who we had lived, just right across the street from each other for 15 years. It was a husband, a wife, and their 24-year-old daughter, who also happened to be our longtime babysitter when our kids were little. They were tragically murdered by their mentally ill son one evening. He was badly underdiagnosed, his actual diagnosis, and he had a completely psychotic episode and could not get mental health care, hospitalized, and ended up murdering his entire family. And because of close to theirs, that night, when it happened, our area was kind of swept up in the search, because he was missing for a while. And that case still, even after all these years, that was back in 2017 when that happened, it still haunts me. Like you said, you think back, like, what must have gone on for that family, trying to help him. The being up against the mental health care system and all the roadblocks and the lack of resources, especially here in Iowa. At that time, it was even worse, which is hard to believe because it's still not great now. And just what his family must have gone through, but also him, how sick he was, and how tortured he must have been. And yeah, that one will probably haunt me for the rest of my life.
Sure. And it sounds like that then, I'm sure it affected your worldview in some way, but then it also affected your art, right? Kind of, I think you mentioned at the start there, but that it was one of the books ended up being based on it, or loosely based on it.
It has a mental health thread through it, and I had a period of time where I was working on it where I started feeling like, how much I don't know. True crime is a weird line you have to walk where you're trying to tell stories of crimes, like the deeper stories behind them about the people involved in them, but also not exploiting people's
Right.
and making entertainment out of it, I guess, for lack of a better word. It's such a hard line to walk, and I question, where am I at on that line?
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm trying to be telling a good story, because that's the job as a writer, but also not. I don't want to exploit and cause further pain for people. So
Sure.
I think
Yeah.
writers are struggling with these very topics. I'm seeing it more and more, and I'm thinking more in more conversations.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's difficult, right? It's that it feels vital, right? And I think storytelling is absolutely vital to society, cultures, humanity in general, right? I mean, it's interwoven with who we are. And so it's you want to tell these stories, you have this thing happen, or you have an idea and you feel like it's important to tell that story. But then where are the guide rails that are important, where's the morality of it? Like, where's I don't want to like hurt someone, but it's also important to tell the story. And I don't necessarily want to write with just guardrails to where, you're trying not to offend anyone, because then you can't actually touch anyone. So it is kind of a juggling act. How did you make rules for yourself? How did you try to manage that?
Yeah, so I think oddly, the very first book I ever wrote taught me some good lessons with that, that book is called The Space Between. It's been out for like 15 years, a long time ago. And it's about a school shooting, and it's fictional, and it's from the point of view of the mother of the shooter. And at the time when I was writing it, I remember thinking about every voice in this situation, instead of looking at it as like separating people into categories, like you are for whatever. Instead, I was trying to think of it as what is the voice of this particular side of that story. So I carried that, I think, through, especially through the last two books that are definitely true crime. Even though I'm using real life story, real life situations as inspiration, I'm looking at it as this is just their voice of this fictional character that represents this part of this real case. But I'm not speaking for these people. They're fictional characters. They're inspired, and it's just that character's voice.
Sure. No, I think that's a lovely way to think of it. Yeah, I think of it sometimes too in my own writing as I try to think of every character as if they think they're the main character, right? Because we're all the protagonist, right, in our own lives. So I try to think of that, and we're all antagonists in some ways too. So I kind of think we're all protagonists, antagonists. Everyone thinks they're the main character and everything that's happening. You have to distill that to tell a coherent, somewhat succinct story, right? You have to be able to finish it at some point. But that's how I try to think of it. So I think it's lovely the way you said that. It's all their voices. This is their voice coming through. So, so actually, maybe that would be a great time to take a dip into. Would you mind reading us some of your work?
Sure. So I think what I'm going to try out. So this is from the new book that I've been working on. I'm very, very close to finishing it. It's another true crime novel, and this one's called A Savage Season, and it is about a Catholic priest who gets transferred to a parish where a young pregnant woman has recently been murdered, and it's kind of pulled in the parish members, including her husband, her young husband, a mentally ill neighbor, and a lot of other community members. And it's set over the course of Lent, so the 40 days of Lent.
Okay.
Yeah. And I loosely based this off a real priest who I met who had this very rare and fascinating medical condition. And he let me interview him, and he really inspired the main character. And then the case itself is also based on a real Iowa case that caught my attention because of this mental health thread.
Awesome.
I'm going to read just the first few opening pages of it, where we meet this new priest arriving in this new town with his medical condition.
Awesome.
So this is chapter 1, from chapter 1, and it's 2 days until the start of Lent. After 3 hours of driving, Father Joel Morris struggled to keep his eyes open, and his old Buick drifted to the shoulder of Highway 26. The tires vibrated over the rumble strips, and the soft gravel shoulders sucked the tire sideways. He jerked the wheel, overcorrecting and fishtailing across the pavement before regaining control. A passing truck in the opposite lane honked and flipped him the bird. Now wide awake and adrenaline pumping through his veins, Joel carefully steered the car into a muddy field access and stopped. He wiped a thin film of perspiration from his brow and took several deep, calming breaths as the episode abated. He laid his index and middle finger on the side of his neck, checking his heart rate, 122 beats per minute. The lightheadedness was caused by the tachycardia caused by the atrial fibrillation, the AFib caused by heart damage from long-term carbon monoxide poisoning. His health had become a long line of falling dominoes. Joel lowered the window to let in some cold late February air and felt better. He signaled and pulled the car back onto the highway. The landscape of western Nebraska sprawled flat and empty in every direction. Once he left Grand Island and headed west, it had felt like he was driving into oblivion. The monochromatic winter vista was uninterrupted only by the rare copse of barren trees, herds of beef cattle swath grazing in snow-dusted pastures, or the occasional cluster of towering white wind turbines looming against the horizon. The radio station dissolved into static, hissing through the blown speaker on the driver's side door, and Joel switched it off. Following the GPS on his phone, he took the marked exit to the southern tip of the Nebraska Sandhills, toward the little town of Savage, a place that appeared to count more cattle than people. He passed a green metal sign that read, "Welcome to Savage, Nebraska, a savagely nice place to live." As Joel followed directions to St. Joe's Catholic Church, he took in the layout of the city limits. 2 gray concrete grain co-op silos dominated the center, and a small red brick library cowered in the silo shadows. The Savage Fire Department and City Hall shared the same plain metal building, and next to that, a Dollar General store. The downtown area consisted of one street lined by stone facade buildings in varying states of age and neglect, with storefront names like Mickey's Tavern, Donna's Cafe, and Johnson Realtors. Just off the downtown strip, Heather's Hair Shack, Collins Funeral Home, and Harper's Auto Dealer and Repair. Like the town founder, the people of Savage seemed to name everything after themselves. Joel reached the edge of town where the historic St. Joe's Church stood, a medieval-looking structure of cream-colored bricks, now dingy with age, a steep-pitched wooden roof, dull stained glass windows, and a domineering bell tower entrance. The small fellowship hall, a newer addition attached to the south transept, had seemingly been built as an afterthought from mismatched orange-toned brick and fitted with plain windows. Joel had never been a fan of old churches because of the expensive, burdensome upkeep and the cold, oppressive feeling they always gave him. This church was no different. He parked his car in the gravel lot next to a mud cake truck and got out to stretch his 6-foot, 5-inch frame. Joel had made the 3-hour-plus trip without stopping, and his legs were killing him. He smoothed down his wavy hair that was more salt than pepper these days. Sunlight reflected off the snow-covered ground, and he squinted, patting his coat pockets for his sunglasses he'd seemingly misplaced at some point during the trip. He shaded his eyes and took in the rectory next door, feeling even more disheartened. A small one-story farmhouse, complete with old lead windows outfitted in paint-peeling arches, a crumbling chimney perched atop a gabled roof, and a sloping front porch. Home, more like self-imposed exile, but temporary at least, just for the Lenten season. Holy Cross, his previous parish in Grand Island, had been a new, bigger building that featured a contemporary sanctuary with modern lighting and AV technology, a spacious hall, a fellowship hall, classrooms, a suite of offices, and completely renovated rectory where Joel had comfortably lived. He acutely missed it and his former parishioners. A cold gust whipped across the parking lot. Joel popped the collar of his coat and turtled his neck, trying to stay warm. He ascended the narrow, ice-crusted steps and entered the dim vestibule. Wind whistled through the gap in the heavy front doors, and the air inside was barely warmer than out. He was glad to have his wool coat. Joel paused at a letterboard on the wall and read the greeting. You can't enter heaven unless Jesus enters you. He snorted. Is something funny? Joel turned around, startled. A stern-looking older woman stood at the top of the stairs. She wore a navy sweatshirt with a picture of 2 kittens frolicking across the chest. No, Joel said, consciously setting his face in a neutral expression. I was just reading the message here. The woman's eyes flickered to the board and back to him. Her upper lip twitched. Joel had a sinking feeling she put up the quote. Can I help you? She asked. Yes, I'm Father Joel Morris, the interim pastor. She drew back. Oh, I didn't realize who you were without your collar. She descended the steps. Joel instinctively touched his neck. He hadn't bothered to put on his clerical collar this morning. It was a long drive, he said, and I wanted to be comfortable. He stopped short of saying that lately the collar had started to feel like it was choking him, and he had taken to leaving it off more and more. She narrowed her eyes at him in seeming disapproval. Welcome to St. Joe's. She offered a firm handshake and a tight smile. I'm Belinda Horney. As soon as she said her name, Joel felt an involuntary bubble of laughter balloon in his belly, and his brain momentarily screamed to hold it in, but the laugh continued to rise and finally popped out of his mouth in a loud burst. So that's his first meeting at the church. Yes. So that's the introduction of the character. This priest with long-term with some cognition issues from long-term carbon monoxide poisoning at his previous parish, and it caused these involuntary reactions and forgetfulness and some other problems. And then of course, he gets sucked into this recent murder of a young parishioner. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You know what I think was delightful about that. It was kind of a masterclass in setting and character and working together. Because the setting, like there's so much foreboding there, right? With the emptiness, and then even just like, and then he's driving through this emptiness and this winter, and you kind of get the feel of death from that. And then his heart's going, and he has this domino. And then what I think was delightful was that I think a lot of times you try to incorporate humor in to kind of break a beat, break the tension a little. And sometimes it can be hit and miss, right? But I think it was very well done there with like the is Savage, is that a real place in Nebraska?
Not. It's not.
Okay, because I love it's a savagely good place to live part.
That's Savage, just not in one in Nebraska, which was good because I wanted it to be a fictional town. So
right.
He's Savage, Indiana. I looked it up once, but there wasn't one in Nebraska.
Right.
As I read, when it's early drafts and you're still trying to polish and finish, as I was reading, I was like, oh, I'm cutting that line. Oh, I think that paragraph should go.
Right. Oh, sure. Oh, what's funny is I have a reading copy. That might actually be the book that's up here of my short story collection there. And It's, it's published. I mean, most of the stories were published. I mean, I think the oldest one was 2005 or something. The first story was published. The whole anthology has been published for a long time. But I have my reading copy, which is where I took pencil and cut out certain lines because I'm like, no. This actually, especially as you read things, it really comes to you. So I'm very big on, I'm always reading as I'm writing, especially as I progress. But yeah, so that one is my special. When I read it, I'm like, nope, this sentence doesn't need to go here.
I find too that you said the book, it's been out since 2005. You've probably changed a lot as a writer and grown, and so now the old words, you do find yourself like self-editing, and it never ends. Yeah, like reading my own work out loud is always tough because I can never read, no matter how many times I read, even after it's published, I still find stuff. I think, why did I write that?
How do you manage? Because there's certain people that love reading their work, certain people that dread it. I think I've had the whole gambit on the show, which is fun. But how do you manage when you need to go read in public?
I read as short an excerpt as possible, to be totally honest, because I find it so difficult to read my own work, especially after it's in print. Here, this was a nice little test run. That was a trick I learned from a famous writer named Ruth Jane Hamilton. She wrote a book called The Book of Ruth, which is one of my favorite books of all time. And I've heard her speak a couple times at writers' conferences. And she did that once. She showed up and she was the keynote speaker, and they asked her to read something, and I'm sure everyone expected her to read from one of her many, well-received published books. And she said, so I'm working on this new book and it's not done, and some of it is still kind of rough and raw, but if you don't mind, I'd like to read it here and kind of see what I think and see how you all react. And it was fun. And she kind of took it for a test drive. And when she got done, she was like, she commented, you laughed a couple times where I thought maybe you would, and then once you didn't, so I'm going to cut that line. But that's a good idea, when you're far enough past the publication date with a piece of work to maybe test run some of the new stuff.
Sure. Yeah, that's brilliant. Comedians do that all the time.
Yeah. Otherwise, stuff that's in print, and I can't change it.
Right. I know you would love to, but it's just like your kids, right? It's like once they're in print, they're adults and stuff, like they're doing their thing.
We're out in the world. There's nothing you can do. Yeah.
Right. But comedians do that all the time, right? They go on tour and then they hone their jokes and they really kind of craft it. And then they do the Netflix or whatever special. People have heard all those jokes before, but that's the finished kind of product. So that's a brilliant concept to go out and read and have it, test run.
Yeah. So I thought I would try it here. I've read from the Monsters We Make so many times, and I usually just read the very short. I think the prologue is only like 2.5 pages. So usually when I was doing promotional events right after the book was published, I usually just read those 2.5 pages because I was like, it's short and sweet. I'm in and out and I'm done. I don't have to read any more of it.
Sure. Well, what I do is, and I actually have to do it even when editing this show, is that when I turn it on, like I'll find like I mean this genuinely. I've really enjoyed all the conversations I've had on here, and there's certain things that will stick with me that I think about from all of them, like at different times. And so like selfishly, I feel like this is a growth opportunity. I mean, the bar was very low, so there's a lot of growing to do, but I think I've done a tad amount, have gone through it, but I hate hearing my voice. Right. And so it's painful. And then like when you read, it can be the same, but I always try to, like, when I read, I think of myself as an actor and I'm just acting this out. I try to detach myself from, I wrote these words, and especially the ones that are published. I think in the case where you're reading it, maybe not so much, but I try to detach myself from it and just think of it like, this is my script. I'm acting this out and I'm trying to give a good performance, to the audience here.
Smart, because I hate the sound of my own voice too. Let alone seeing myself on camera. That's even worse. But finding a way to detach yourself, that's smart.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I try to do when I'm editing too, is I don't pay that much attention to me enough, because I don't do a ton of editing. Even watch the show and know it's pretty free flowing. But I will go through, and occasionally some of the longer shows, like we need bathroom breaks or whatever, right? Like things happen. But I always just try to go through. Okay, I go through, and that's not me. That's maybe at that point I'm thinking more like a director. I'm like, I try to not even think of that as me. That's just a character on the screen, and I'm just like watching these two characters and trying to pick up on, can we maybe sometimes like it's probably more me. Sometimes I'll hem and haw for like 15 seconds. I'm like, that's really not necessary. Maybe I can just cut this hemming and hawing for 15 seconds and save the dear viewers some heartache. But moving on with the writing. So I actually kind of like to ask, especially with someone as awarded and as well received as you, is if you were to give a piece of advice for any of the writers in the audience, and maybe we can split it in two. If there's one piece of advice for people kind of just starting off, kind of early in their career, and maybe one for more people more advanced, going, what would you give them?
Starting out, for writers who are maybe just starting out, really new to it, my advice would be to start finding other writers to connect with, other writers to talk about writing and bounce ideas off of, and maybe even get to know each other, start sharing your work, just to start getting a little bit of feedback and getting used to getting feedback. And maybe getting involved in a writing community can be inspiring to keep you writing on a regular basis. For more seasoned writers who've been at it a little longer, especially for those writers who are trying to write a novel, my two biggest pieces of advice is, one, figure out what it's going to take for you to finish a draft. Whatever your writing routine is, whatever your, whether you like to plot or you like to just, when they call it plotting or plotter or pantser, whatever you want to call it. Or maybe you write in spurts, or you like a dedicated, disciplined daily writing routine, whatever it's going to take for you to finish a draft. Because, the truth is, the majority of novels that fail because they don't get finished. And you can't edit an unfinished book. You can't go back and start looking. And the same goes for a short story. Whatever it's going to take you to learn how to finish a project. And then number two, learn how to do hard revisions, like to get in there. And I don't mean like line editing, like fixing typos and stuff. I mean getting in there and taking feedback, learning how to take feedback, and like cutting chapters, cutting characters, adding new scenes, expanding, totally rewriting whole sections, because that's what all working writers will do. It's a lot more rewriting than it is writing.
Right.
That's to learn. A lot of writers don't realize how much it's actually rewriting versus original first draft writing.
Sure. Yeah. I think we want to believe that first draft was so genius.
Oh, don't we all? Wouldn't that be just wonderful?
It's not true, guys. I'm sorry, everybody. But yeah. I think about that a lot, because the first novel I ever had published was published under the title The Hordes of Torment. And I had a very bad experience with the publisher. And after a few years, they gave me the rights back. And we talked. I was like, not a good fit, yada yada. It's a longer story, but I'll save it for private conversations. So I got it back, and one of the things that had horrified me is they hadn't copy edited it. So there was a typo on the very first page, and this pained me because I edit to death. But it was, the quote was facing the wrong way. And I didn't notice the quote, and I went back and looked, and it was always facing the wrong way, but I never noticed until it was in the different format of a physical book in my hand. Well, when I got the rights back, I was like, you know what? I want to try to make this just the best it can be. I'm not going to go crazy. I'm working on other projects, but I'm going to take a minute and I'm just going to go through and actually had the physical book, and I went through and edited the whole first chapter, completely rewrote it. I just dumped the old one. In fact, there's a cinematic book trailer for it, and I actually kind of like it. It uses that old because it was for the Hordes of Torment. It uses some of the dialogue from that or some of the narration from it, and none of that's actually in the book anymore. But I think the first chapter, and actually the editor I was working with it also thought the same thing. It was much better. There's chapters I cut. There's just a ton. So I ended up carving through that. It wasn't even surgical. I mean, some of it was pretty blunt, but, and I think and I even changed the title. Now the title's But the Ripping Apart. And I think overall it's so much better. And not just publisher aside, it's that because I had that distance from it. And I think that's the hard thing, because you finish something and you really want to just be done and get to it. But that distance really offers a lot of perspective. And if you can
come back a novel with very fresh eyes. And the good thing about getting older is if I take a few months away from it, then I can't even remember what I wrote. So it's all kind of and fresh. And I can look at it very objectively, like, okay, this might be working. This is terrible. This needs to come out. Whereas, right away, when it's all still really fresh, I'm still too kind of attached to it, I think. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, it's wonderful actually to forget. I think that's the superpower of older writers is I forgot. What is this about? And what's great too is sometimes it kind of can help you pinpoint not so much plot holes, but things that aren't connected just right. It's just like, wait, what is this about? And then you realize, oh, it's not there. I need to add some foreshadowing or whatever it might be.
This differently or something. Yeah, I have that.
Very great. So awesome. So it's been an absolute delight talking to you. Thanks so much for coming on. As I like to say on the shows, it's last call. You don't have to leave, but you'll have to restart the video. What I like to end on, though, is one piece of not writing advice, but just one piece of life advice you'd offer, the audience.
One piece of life advice. Oh, this is going to be a weird one, but this is very personal for me. This is for any female viewers or listeners out there who are over the age of 40. My advice is, if you have the means, please, 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 please get your yearly mammogram. I am a breast cancer survivor because of a yearly checkup. So that's always my advice out there, especially for women who have the means to get it.
Oh, very good. Yeah, that's great advice. I think about that commonly because we had a family member that was just diagnosed and they caught it so early that it sounds like it's the prognosis is great. So there'd be some, surgeries, some minor things. Well, I shouldn't say minor, major things, but a short period of things. And then she should be fully recovered. And so we're super grateful for that versus my dad, who, which is funny, might be the only family member that listens to the show. So hi, Dad, love you. My dad has a stage 4 colon cancer. And it's partially because he was having symptoms for a long time and he wouldn't go to the doctor because he's very much like not. And so now he sees doctors constantly. Good news of that story for anyone hearing that is that they didn't think he was going to have 18 months when he got diagnosed, and we're 10 years. Trying to look at. He went to City of Hope, which is a pretty world-renowned cancer hospital right down the road from me. My wife actually works there, and he's a rascal, but but then it was hard going there at first. Quite a few surgeries and chemo and things, but he's hung in there, and it's been great. So we've been blessed. We've been very lucky in that regard, but. always, cancer is one of those things. If you can catch it early enough, you have a great shot. You just can't ignore those symptoms or ignore the mammograms or the other things you can do. I'll put on here just for the fellows that I'm sure there's some, and I don't know what it is offhand, so I don't want to misquote it, but I know there is a certain amount. There's the colonoscopies, which I'm due for. My doctor just told me because it's 45 this year, and he's like, okay, family history, you're going to get that colonoscopy, and then there's the prostate checks that are important for our male folks in the audience. So
my life advice now: if you have the medical means insurance or you have access to it, just get those checkups.
Sure. Awesome. So cool. So we'll go there. So, and I'll include your website links and everything, any social links you'd like me to include, I'll include them with the show notes, the description and YouTube. Anything else, if someone wants to learn more information on you, anywhere you direct them?
On social media, I'm at Callie Writing. So just at KALI Writing. So I'm pretty easy to find.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks again so much for your time. You have a lovely, Iowa's Central,
yes.
So, okay. So my people I work with are in Wisconsin a lot. So you're 6 p.m. now. So it's dinner time. Thanks so much for coming on.